JT looked the other way, pretending not to be interested. I found him in the street, Mr. Rosen explained. I thought maybe the boy would take care of him. He looked back and forth at the three of them anxiously. Both Rodine and Mama Melcy looked at JT, but he kept his eyes glued to the television set. Mr. Rosen continued, "It wouldn't cost you a penny from the store. You can have food and everything it needs. No problem." The kitten struggled to free itself from Mr. Rosen's muffler. It crawled out of the basket, dragging the muffler with it. Then, free at last, it did a Halloween cat dance across the floor. The three grown-ups laughed. Rodine was deeply touched. "We thank you," she said. She got down on the floor next to the kitten and went through the basket, finding the radio among the cans of tuna and the bag of kitty litter. She held it up for JT to see. He barely acknowledged recognition. Mr. Rosen started to leave and Rodine stopped him. "Wait, you forgot your muffler." Mr. Rosen took it from her. "Woman," he grumbled, "you've all got mufflers on your minds. Well, good night, good night." Mama Melcy closed the door behind him. "Well, now, who said there ain't no Santa Claus?" she said. "You just never know what's gonna happen. You just never know." The kitten began to explore the room. It sniffed every piece of furniture and examined every corner. It stopped in front of JT and rubbed its head on his outstretched foot. Mama Melcy saw JT look at the kitten out the corner of his eye. She looked at Rodine. "It's beginning to feel a little like Christmas, ain't it?" she said. Later that night, JT lay in bed watching the neon sign flicker on and off and listening to music from his radio. He couldn't find any music he liked. He tried all the stations, but nothing fitted his feelings. He heard a soft meow beside him. He looked down and saw the kitten looking lost and lonely. JT turned over on his stomach and reached down and scratched behind its tiny ears. The kitten blinked and began to purr contentedly. JT swept the kitten up into bed with him, and they both went to sleep. The next morning, as JT came out of his building, he stopped dead in his tracks. There was the red convertible parked almost in front of his house. He stared at it and made a decision. As he bounded up the stairs to his apartment 2 at a time, the thoughts that had been jumbled in his head for some time began to make sense. Mama Melcy and Rodine looked up startled when he bolted through the door over to his bed. He got the radio out from under his pillow and rushed out again. Curious to know what all the commotion was about, they both went to the window and looked out. They saw JT emerge below them and go over to the red convertible. He pushed open the side window and put the little radio inside. Rodine began to cry. "He gonna be all right. He gonna be all right," she said. Mama Melcy put her arms around her daughter. JT turned away from the car and saw Boomer and Claymore staring at him. Somehow, he felt different about them now. He looked straight at them, daring them to start something. Then he walked between them. He did not look back. He knew they would not be following him. He kept going down the block until he reached Mr. Rosen's store. He went inside and found Mr. Rosen checking the stock behind the counter. They exchanged looks. Then JT blurted out, "I come to ask you for a job." Mr. Rosen's expression was thoughtful. "As a matter of fact," he said, "I could do with some help. It's almost a half hour before time for school. Can you start now?" JT nodded. "Sarah," Mr. Rosen called to his wife. "Sarah, the boy." Mrs. Rosen interrupted him. "Abe, we need a rice delivery. Write it down on the list," she said. "Why?" Mr. Rosen wanted to know. "We still have half a carton full." Mrs. Rosen came to the front of the store. "You know, Abe, that's the difference between us. To me, the carton is half empty. To you, it's half full." She pondered the matter lightly. "I wonder who's right, you or me?" Mr. Rosen smiled. "I am," he said, and put his arm around JT. "Sarah, I've decided the boy, he's coming to work for us." Mrs. Rosen squinted at her husband, then at JT. Mr. Rosen pointed to the meat compartment. "Behind that door, to the right, there's a tray of sausages. You can bring them out, huh?" JT went for the door. He was struggling to open it when Mrs. Rosen called to him. "Wait," she said, and reached out for Mr. Rosen's muffler. "Here, You'll catch your death in there. It's like North and South Pole put together. She wrapped the muffler around him and smiled at him. Then she pinched him on his cheeks. "Geh Gesundheit," she said. JT looked at Mr. Rosen for help. "Do I have to wear this? Do I?" Mr. Rosen smiled broadly, obviously tickled at what he saw. He shrugged his shoulders helplessly and nodded yes. Mr. Rosen helped JT with the heavy freezer door. Mr. Rosen watched him for a moment, then went over to the door and looked out onto the street. "It's beginning to feel like Christmas," JT said. So in the last half of the book, we learned that JT gets reunited with Bones after he was thought to be dead. Were you guys surprised that Mr. Rosen brought Bones back? At the end of the book, we see JT return the radio to the red convertible. He also went into Mr. Rosen's store and asked him for a job. What sparked his decision to finally do the right thing? Let us know in the comments below. I hope you guys enjoyed this reading of JT. I hope to see you soon. Have a good one.